Imagine a winter that lasted for 3,000 years. A world where temperatures plummeted lower than anything we can experience today, where white ice swallowed even the highest mountains, and the north wind was like freezing cold blades cutting across the steppe. This is not the setting for a fantasy story, but the harsh reality our ancestors faced during the late Ice Age, around 20,000 years ago. How could small groups of humans with rudimentary tools of stone and bone not only survive, but thrive in such a hellish environment? The answer lay buried for millennia, deep within the permafrost and giant bone shelters. They did it through a bold and astonishing survival strategy. They became the hunters and consumers of giant creatures, the giants of the Ice Age. This is the untold story of how our ancestors ate megafauna to survive. And if you want to explore more shocking truths from the distant past, please subscribe to the Historical Truth channel so you don't miss any of our stories. Let us turn back time to a Europe far different from today. Not lush forests or bustling cities, but a vast cold steppe stretching from the Atlantic all the way to Siberia. This was the Mammoth Steppe, a harsh wilderness teeming with life. The sky was often gray, and the ground was permafrost, thawing only a few centimeters during the short summer. In this biting cold, where temperatures could easily drop below 40 degrees Celsius, human life seemed an impossibility. But our ancestors, anatomically modern humans, of the Gravettian and later Magdalenian cultures, were there. They were not the crude brutes we once imagined. They were masters of adaptation, skilled artisans, and above all, brilliant survival strategists. They lived in semi-nomadic groups of 25 to 50 people, moving with the herds and the seasons. Their shelters were not dark caves, which were rare, but sophisticated dwellings built from the bones and tusks of the very giants they hunted. Imagine a construction site from 20,000 BCE. No steel, no concrete. The primary building material was the skeleton of a woolly mammoth. Curved rib bones, up to 4 meters long, were driven deep into the frozen ground, forming a sturdy dome frame. The massive jawbone served as the doorway. Over the top, they laid carefully prepared animal hides and then a layer of snow, creating perfect insulation against the outside cold. Inside these architectural wonders of bone, fire was maintained day and night, the only light and warmth against the endless dark and cold. The smell of smoke, tanned hides, burning animal fat, and warm bodies mingled together. This was not just a shelter, this was a fortress of survival, built from the very enemies they had conquered. And who were these enemies? Or rather, these sources of life? Step onto the steppe and witness the incredible ecosystem of which they were a part. It was a world of giants. The woolly mammoth, standing up to 4 meters tall and weighing over 6 tons with shaggy fur and curved tusks up to 5 meters long. The steppe bison, far larger than their modern descendants, with massive shoulder humps and horns sharp as spears. The woolly rhinoceros, a heavy-set creature with thick fur and a large horn on its snout. The Irish elk, with an antler span of up to 4 meters, and cave lions, larger than today's African lions. These were biological machines, walking storehouses of meat, fat, and hide. A single adult mammoth could yield over 2 tons of meat and fat, enough to sustain a group of 50 people through many harsh winter months. But how could humans with stone-tipped spears bring down such colossal and dangerous creatures? The secret lay not in brute strength, but in superior intelligence and cooperation at a high level. They were not solitary predators. They were a perfectly coordinated hunting machine. Gravettian hunters were individuals with a deep understanding of animal behavior, terrain, and weather. They would track a mammoth herd for days, waiting for the perfect moment. They used the landscape as a trap, luring the giants into narrow ravines, boggy ground, or off cliffs, where they lost their advantage of size and strength. From a safe distance, they hurled throwing spears tipped with exquisitely crafted flint points, capable of piercing the thick hide and underlying fat. Each hunt was not just a life-or-death battle. It was a carefully orchestrated drama where patience, skill, and courage merged into one. But bringing down the prey was only the beginning of a longer, more dangerous journey. How did they process such a colossal amount of meat before it spoiled in the cold? And more importantly, how did they turn every part of the animal into a resource for life? Let's continue to explore this incredible struggle for survival, When the giant prey finally fell, an even more colossal task truly began. On the frozen steppe, under the dim light of the winter sun, the entire tribe would join forces in a race against time. The deep sub-zero temperatures were a double-edged sword. They threatened the hunters' lives, but were also the perfect preservative. The first job was skinning, a complex process requiring finely crafted stone tools. Hand axes and scrapers made from razor-sharp flint blades, hafted onto wood or bone handles. The mammoth hide, up to 2.5 centimeters thick, was not just material for clothing and shelter, but also a giant canvas for holding all the meat and organs inside. Next was the work of butchering. Skilled workers used flint blades to cut through the enormous muscle masses, separating slabs of fresh red meat weighing dozens of kilograms. Fat, a resource more precious than meat in winter, was cut into strips and set aside. In this harsh energy world, animal fat was a concentrated source of calories, fuel for keeping the body warm, and material for torches. The liver, heart, kidneys, and especially the giant tongue, nutrient-rich organs, were prioritized for immediate consumption in a celebratory feast, providing instant energy for the exhausted workers. But how to preserve tons of this meat for the months ahead? Our ancestors invented techniques still used today. They sliced the meat into thin strips, hung them on bone racks, and let the dry, cold north wind naturally dry them, creating a prehistoric jerky. Another method was natural freezing. They dug deep pits in the permafrost, packed them with meat, and covered them with hides and a thick layer of snow, turning the ground into a giant freezer. This was the food store for the long winter, and not a single part of the animal was wasted. The massive skeleton was not just for building houses. Long bones were split for tools or weapons. Ribs could become crude plows to till the topsoil. Vertebrae were used as seats inside the huts. Even the bone marrow inside, an extremely important source of fat and nutrition, was cracked open and extracted. Mammoth tusks were the most precious, malleable enough to carve, but hard enough to create sturdy spear points. Artisans turned them into exquisite sewing needles, small Venus figurines, symbols of fertility and prosperity, and intricate ornaments. Life in these bone-built villages was not easy. Even with huge reserves, the specter of famine always loomed. An unusually long winter, a series of failed hunts, or the migration of herds could threaten the survival of the entire community. Children and the elderly were the most vulnerable, but this very dependence on giant resources drove dramatic social and technological advancements. The need to coordinate large hunts fostered the development of complex language and social organization. Tool-making skills reached unprecedented peaks, and perhaps most importantly, this survival pressure sparked the first seeds of art and belief. The exquisite paintings of mammoths, bison, and woolly rhinos, drawn with red ochre and charcoal on cave walls like Lascaux and Chauvet, were not mere decoration. They were part of shamanic rituals, a way to communicate with the spirit world, pray for a successful hunt, or honor the spirit of the animal that had given its life to feed the tribe. They understood that their lives were exchanged for the lives of these giant creatures. However, this risky symbiotic relationship could not last forever. As the climate began to warm, the vast Mammoth Steppe gradually shrank, giving way to dense forests. And then, a decisive change occurred, not only altering the way of life of our ancestors, but also reshaping the entire world they and the giants inhabited. What was that turning point, and what tragic end did it lead to for the giant creatures that once dominated the planet? The change began subtly, almost unnoticeable over many generations. Summers became slightly longer, a bit more humid. The permafrost in low-lying areas began to melt, turning dry land into muddy swamps. Lichens and mosses, the primary food source for woolly. The mammoths were gradually replaced by grasses and shrubs. The majestic Mammoth Steppe, the kingdom of the giants, was being torn apart. Initially, the Gravettian and Magdalenian hunters probably welcomed the warming. The bone-chilling cold eased, and richer vegetation offered new opportunities. But they quickly realized a cruel truth. The encroaching birch and pine forests were not ideal habitat for the giant herds they depended on. The woolly mammoth, designed for the dry, cold, open steppe, struggled to find food in the wet forests. Their herds became smaller and more scattered, the steppe bison and woolly rhino faced the same habitat crisis. This was the moment the relationship between humans and megafauna entered a new, darker phase. For millennia, humans had hunted sustainably as part of the ecosystem. But now, as their core resource shrank, hunting pressure increased exponentially. Each mammoth killed was no longer just a victory. It became an irreplaceable loss. Hunts became more desperate. Human groups, which had grown in number and skill thanks to the abundant food, now competed fiercely for increasingly scarce prey. Archaeological evidence from late Paleolithic sites shows a significant shift. Large base camps, the meticulously built bone villages, were gradually abandoned. Humans were forced to become more mobile, moving in smaller groups to pursue smaller, more elusive game. Their tools changed too. Large spear points designed to take down giant prey were gradually replaced by smaller, more versatile arrowheads for hunting deer, boar, and hares. They were adapting, but it was a painful adaptation, abandoning the lifestyle that had shaped their culture and society for millennia. And then, the final blow fell. The disappearance of the megafauna was not a single event, but a process spanning thousands of years, a smoldering extinction event. The woolly mammoth, the icon of the Ice Age, eventually retreated to last Arctic refuges like Wrangel Island, where a small population survived a few more millennia before vanishing entirely. The woolly rhinoceros, the giant steppe bison, and the Irish elk were wiped out one by one. The cave lion and cave hyena also disappeared as their primary prey base dwindled. For decades, scientists have fiercely debated the cause of this mass extinction. Was it climate change or human overhunting? Increasing evidence supports a combined theory, the 1-2 punch. Climate change weakened and shrank megafauna populations, pushing them into a vulnerable state. And then, the arrival of highly efficient, organized hunters, our ancestors, became the coup de grace. They did not intend to wipe out entire species. They were simply fighting for their own survival in a rapidly changing world. Each mammoth killed was a short-term victory for a community, but a long-term failure for a species. The disappearance of the giants left a massive void in the ecosystem and in the human psyche. Stories of huge, majestic creatures, of great hunts, became ingrained in the collective memory, perhaps the origin of myths and legends about dragons and giant monsters later told around campfires. But the most important legacy of the megafauna hunting era was not the stories, but the invaluable survival lessons that shaped humanity's destiny. How did our ancestors overcome the catastrophe of losing their primary food source? And how did this dark age open a new chapter, leading to the birth of agriculture? The disappearance of their giant prey was a brutal survival shock, a prehistoric global catastrophe. No more feasts lasting months, no more huge fat reserves to weather the winter. The world our ancestors knew had collapsed, but instead of going extinct, they demonstrated extraordinary flexibility, once again writing a new chapter for human history. The post-megafauna era witnessed a revolution in survival strategy, forcing humans to diversify or die. They were no longer the masters of hunting giant prey, but became comprehensive hunter-gatherers. Their diet shrank significantly in scale, but expanded in range. Deer, boar, hare, and even small rodents became crucial protein sources. They learned to exploit resources from rivers, lakes, and the sea, fish, shellfish, seals, things that might have been overlooked compared to a mammoth. Women and children, with their deep knowledge of plants, played an increasingly important role in gathering nuts, berries, roots, and fungi, supplementing the poorer diet. Their tools became smaller, more sophisticated, and more specialized, reflecting the change in lifestyle. Tiny flint blades called microliths could be mounted on arrows or spears to create high lethality weapons for small game. Groundstone axes appeared, an advanced technology allowing more efficient tree felling, opening up forests for settlement and hunting. The invention of the bow and arrow, a revolutionary development, allowed them to hunt from a distance with greater accuracy and safety. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within the social structure itself. Large groups once necessary to hunt and process megafauna became impractical. Society fragmented into smaller, more flexible family units, moving more frequently to exploit seasonal resources. They became more deeply attached to specific territories, memorizing every stream, forest, and hill. Knowledge of the local environment became the most valuable asset. And then, from the ashes of the grand megafauna hunting culture, a new seed began to sprout. More settled communities, especially in the fertile Near East, known as the Fertile Crescent, began experimenting with what their ancestors had merely gathered. They noticed that seeds from certain wild grasses like emmer wheat and barley could be sown and harvested intentionally. They began managing herds of wild animals like sheep, goats, and pigs, gradually domesticating them. This was not a sudden decision, but an evolutionary process over millennia, driven by the scarcity of large game and the increasing stability of plant resources. The transition to agriculture, the Neolithic Revolution, was in fact a new survival strategy. If they could no longer rely on giant walking meat machines, they would create their own food source in a more controlled and predictable way. It was a direct inheritance of the skills and knowledge accumulated during the megafauna era: patience, keen observation of natural cycles, and the cooperative spirit to manage common resources. The legacy of the megafauna hunting era did not disappear. It was encoded in our genes, culture, and psychology. The craving for fat and protein, the fear of dark and cold, the desire for stories of adventure and great monsters, all stem from tens of thousands of years of living, dependent on those giant creatures. But perhaps the greatest legacy is the spirit of endless adaptation. Our ancestors faced the collapse of an entire world, and not only survived, but found a way to thrive, laying the foundation for all subsequent civilizations. But how were the memories of that glorious era preserved? And what archaeological evidence helped us piece together this incredible story? For millennia, the story of our ancestors' struggle for survival in the sub-zero cold of the Ice Age lay in darkness, covered by the dust of time and thick layers of soil. The giants of the Ice Age gradually became legends, magnificent creatures and campfire stories that no one truly believed were real. It wasn't until the archaeologist Spade began to touch monuments deep within the earth that the astonishing truth was gradually revealed. The journey to rediscover this majestic past is a tale as thrilling as the history itself. It began with accidental discoveries. In the 19th century, miners in Siberia dug up unbelievably large tusks and skeletons from the permafrost. At first, they believed them to be the bones of monsters or giants from the Bible. But scientists quickly recognized these as the remains of an extinct animal, the woolly mammoth. Yet, a major question remained. What happened to them? The first crucial breakthrough came from a site in Ukraine in the 1900s. Archaeologists excavated a Paleolithic settlement with strangely structured huts. The building material wasn't wood or stone, but bones, hundreds of giant mammoth jawbones, skulls, and long bones. This was the first undeniable evidence of the bone houses we mentioned. It proved that humans not only hunted mammoths, but used every part of them, turning the giant foe into their own fortress of survival. As the 20th century passed, more and more evidence was gathered. In caves like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, beautiful wall paintings dating back over 17,000 years were discovered. On the rock faces, our ancestors had vividly and artistically depicted images of bison, woolly rhinos, and mammoths. These paintings were not just art. They were historical documents, visual records of the fauna they depended on. They showed an observation so refined to the smallest detail, from the majestic posture of the herd leader to the running stance of a bison, proving a close and long-standing relationship. But perhaps the most compelling and moving evidence came from smaller finds. Ivory spear points were found still embedded in the rib bones of fossilized mammoths, undeniable proof of the hunts. Stone hearths with shattered bone fragments around them showed sophisticated cooking and marrow extraction techniques. And most recently, advances in stable isotope analysis from ancient human skeletons revealed a stunning fact. Their diet contained very high levels of protein from large grazing animals, confirming that megafauna meat was their primary nutritional source. Every archaeological piece, from the giant bone houses to the tiny spear points, from the majestic cave paintings to the chemical traces in bones, combined to create a comprehensive picture. It tells the story of a grueling struggle for survival, of extraordinary ingenuity, and of a fateful relationship between humans and giant creatures that shape the destiny of both. So, what is the final lesson we can draw from this incredible journey? The shocking truth that our ancestors ate megafauna to survive is not just a historical anecdote. It is a profound reminder of human resilience, the trade-offs of survival, and perhaps a warning from the distant past. The story of our ancestors' struggle for survival in the sub-zero cold of the Ice Age is not merely a closed chapter in the history book. It echoes like an ancient reverberation, carrying profound lessons and warnings no less relevant for us today. The journey from megafauna hunters to civilization builders left a complex legacy, both proud and thought-provoking. First, it is the ultimate lesson in adaptation. Our ancestors were not the strongest or fastest creatures on the steppe, but they were the most flexible. When the world changed, when the giant resources dwindled, they did not cling to an obsolete way of life. Instead, they reinvented themselves, from majestic hunters to diverse foragers, and finally, the first farmers. The ability to innovate, learn, and abandon what no longer served survival was their most powerful weapon. In our modern world also facing profound climate change, this lesson in flexibility and innovation has never been more necessary. Second, this story exposes the deep and contradictory relationship between humans and nature. Our ancestors were not brutal conquerors of nature. They were part of it, living and dying by the generosity of the ecosystem. They revered the animals they hunted, as shown through art and likely rituals. But ultimately, the combination of their hunting prowess and environmental shift led to the collapse of an entire ecosystem. This is a primordial warning about human impact. We may no longer use spears to bring down giant prey, but our collective actions today, from deforestation to greenhouse gas emissions, are creating a new global hunt, pushing countless species to the brink of extinction. The disappearance of the megafauna is a first and tragic example of how one species, even with simple tools, can reshape the entire planet. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the legacy of that era is etched into our very being, the instinctual craving for fat and meat, the primal fear of dark and cold, the desire to connect in community to face challenges together. All are echoes from that distant past. Our success as a species was built on the backbone of giants. We are the descendants of those who dared to challenge the largest creatures, endured the harshest conditions, and innovated relentlessly in the face of disaster. The journey from the icy steppes to the modern world today is a testament to the tenacity and unshakable imagination of the human spirit. The next time you bite into a piece of meat, feel the warmth of a heater on a cold winter night, or hear a story about giants and monsters, take a moment to remember our distant ancestors. Remember their grueling struggle for survival, the giants of flesh and bone that once walked this earth, and the shocking truth that we are here today partly because they had the courage and wisdom to eat them. Thank you for joining us on this journey to explore the incredible historical truth. If you want to discover more forgotten secrets of the past, please subscribe to the Historical Truth channel and join us as we delve deeper into the untold stories that shaped humanity.